Alright, so in this video we're gonna take a look at my Charge remix that I put out about 2 months ago. So far it's been supported by CRANKDAT, Riot 10, even played it out at Lost Lands, which was insane to see. For those who don't yet know, I also have this project file available on my Patreon, as well as a bunch of other project files, so if you want to open it up and go into it yourself, sign up to the Patreon and you can find it there. For this breakdown, we're going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to start with the drop first, and after that we're going to go over the intro, the break, and the build-up. So yeah, stay tuned. Let's just get into the drop. We'll start it off with the drums that we have over here. Nothing crazy going on. If you're familiar with my project files from the Patreon, you see that I use this kick a lot. This is one of the kicks that I have from the sample packs up there. One of my favorite kicks that I made, very versatile, like whether it be like dubstep, trap, even drum and bass. I've made drum and bass songs with this kick. It's very versatile, doesn't need any processing, just has like a really nice transient and a good like low end. And if you want a shorter kick, like if you're making stuff like trap or whatever, it becomes very easy to shorten it and, you know, use it in whatever you like. I just really like the kick. So that's why I stuck with it for this song. And then for the snares, we got 2 layers. We have this ivory snare, sounds like this. And then the samplifier snare, or a clap, I guess, which is just like a very drawn out, like reverby clap that just sits on top of the ivory snare, like a very nice layer, right? Because if we look at the transient of this, it's pretty sharp, right? It almost looks like a kick drum. Like if we zoom in on the start, so it almost looks like a kick, which is the reason why I didn't layer it with my own kick. So usually I would kind of layer it like this, but yeah, obviously you can see we have these transients going on here that they're gonna fight with each other, so it's just gonna sound messy. So what I sometimes like to do is just create like a little fade, so that the only transient that's coming through is the transient from the kick drum. But let's see what it sounds like. It might sound really terrible, so yeah, as you can tell, right? Too much low end. So that's why for this remix, I just decided to use this snare without the kick drum, because this already has a lot of low end in it, right? And again, great samples from both ivory and samplifier. Don't need any processing. The only processing that I have going on here is on the group, on the kick and snare group, and it's just a transient shaper, just to pull out the transient a little bit more. But this is something that I mainly do when I'm like close to finishing the song, like mastering the song, when I think that the drums need like a little bit more punch. That's when I add it, because with it, it sounds like this. And then let's play without. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear that on the recording, but it just adds like a little bit of like a click at the start of each sample. Just helps the drums punch through in the final mix. And then after that, we got the percussions up here. Sound like this. If we go through them, we have a crash here. This is the same crash that I use in all of my songs as well, so I labeled it favorite crash. Makes it very easy to find it. We have the Sultan ride. Like every 1 and 3. More hi-hats with some groove to them. Which I think is very important, right? If you just have hi-hats that are like layered on the exact same position in the grid, it just makes it very still, very boring. That's why even like small things like a hi-hat can just add so much groove to a track, and really work well with like the rhythm that you have going on for like your main synths, like your basses. That's why I think it's very important to still create that groove, even if it's even if it's with just percussion, right? So if we listen to just the kick and the snare and the percussion, you can tell, right? There's already like some groove going on there. So very important to have that. Just adds a bit more like swing. Then we ended off with like this splash, which is kind of like a ride and a crash in one. Just adds like, it's almost like white noise, to be honest. It just adds like that extra layer to really make your percussion come through in a mix. And then for the effects here, nothing going on except the effects on the percussion group, which is just a sidechain. And for the sidechain, I'm literally just taking off the transient of the track, right? Or the transient of the sample. So as you can see here, this yellow line is just taking off like the sharp edge, like the sharp start of these sounds, just to make sure that the only transient that gets through is this kick drum. So in that case, nothing is conflicting, right? So that's what I have there. And then just to be sure, I have this EQ here to just take out the lows, because for whatever reason, sometimes the hi-hats or the cymbal samples that you use still contain like sub or like low end, which is something that you don't want to have. So just to be sure, I always throw on an EQ there just to cut them out. And then below here, we have the bass group, or as I like to call it, the drop group, which contains all the sounds that I like to use in my drop. And so I have this set up in multiple layers. So the way I like to organize my drops is to have all the main basses inside of one group. So in this case, I just called it the basses group. And so all this green stuff that I'm selected, that's going to be inside of my basses group. And so if we play it, it sounds like this. So those are all the sounds that I have in there. And then as you notice, there's no sub, because I like to process my subs separately and then combine them later. But this is the sub over here. I just find like if you split them up and try to like do them separately, it just gives you a lot more control, gives you a lot more freedom to either like just mix it better, or it just makes it easier to like avoid mistakes, to be honest. Like that's why on this bass group here, you can see that I have a low cut. And so whenever the sub is playing, I make sure that there's no sub coming through any of these like main basses, right? And as you can see here, this EQ is automated. And so the only time where I have the EQ off is whenever the sub isn't playing. So over here, when there's no sub, I just turn off the EQ to still have that sub come through in my main basses. But if we go through the main basses, they're gonna sound like this. I'm just gonna go from top to bottom. Usually I organize them a little bit, but I think in this case, there's not really like an order to it. So let's just go through them one by one. Very simple bass loop, just to add some groove, layered with one of my own basses, which just acts like a stomp almost for the drums. So if we play that and the drums, like it's a very simple downbeat, but I think it's very important to have because it adds some extra like stomp to your drums, right? And then the main sound is gonna be this one over here, which I made with Reason Rec. Sounds like this. I was watching the Samplifier video that he made like I think a few years ago, where he goes over one of his tracks in the Disciple Studios, which is on their YouTube as well. I used that as like a starting block because I had never worked with Reason before. So I used that as a starting block to like get through Reason and figure out how it works, because like I said, never used it before. So great video, like highly recommend watching that. Just gives some really good insights on how to create sounds like this with Maelstrom, but also the processing, because if we turn off the processing on this, let me see. Without the processing, it sounds very empty. Like this is just the Reason Rec. So we got the synth over here together with the distortion and like a little chorus flanger. So sounds very, very dry, right? But then with all the post processing, so very heavy. Let's go through it one by one. Let me disable all of these. We'll go through it one by one. So again, started off with an OTT just to like really blow up that sound, like make it a lot louder. Or I guess in this case, it's more compressing because I have the output at 0. Like if we were to turn up the output, we'd get that really like typical OTT sound, right? But In this case, I just have it to compress it more, and then we're gonna bring it up after. So OTT. Then there's drum bus preset. It's called Flattenator. So if we do Control F or Command F on Mac, type Flattenator, you can see the preset loaded in. Sounds like this. Additional compression, usually use it for drums, but in this case we use it for the bass sound. And after that, we got a saturator, which is the M saturator from Melda, which is a free plugin. I highly recommend getting that because it's just a lot more customizable than the Ableton saturator, right? If we look over here, like we have a lot more controls. So I like to use that. With the saturator, it sounds like this. This really brings it out and like gives it that distortion that we want for this type of music. After that, we got a hiss, which is an erosion preset from Ableton as well. Set to white noise, so it just adds like some stereo white noise on the very top end of the sound, just to like bring up that high end a little bit more, because the main sound itself is very like low, like mid heavy, but it doesn't have a lot of highs. So this is one of the ways that we adds like a little bit of we add a little bit of highs to it. And then after that, we got another compression, just to really bring the sound together. So that's pretty noticeable. And then after that, we got a convolution reverb, which is layered with a dry signal. So the dry signal is just the original sample, right? Or the original sound. So this, and then we add a layer on top, which sounds like this. Which inside of the hybrid reverb, you can either drag in your own samples, or you can select one of these samples here, or one of the presets here. I think in this case, I just used one of the Ableton like settings, one of the Ableton reverb presets. And then the important thing is to drag this all the way up to 100% wet, right? Because we use this as like a separate layer on top of the original. So we want to make sure that the supporting layer is set at 100% wet. And so that sounds like this. And then together, it just creates like a little bit of stereo and some extra high end, right? Like if we play the width, and then without, very noticeable, right? So this is like carrying like the majority of the sound, to be honest, just this like hybrid reverb. And then you have all these controls that you can use to kind of like not really adjust the pitch, but it sounds like you are. So if we just play around with these settings, like as you can see, you can just kind of go crazy with the K and the size, and with that you can create different sounds. And that's just trial and error, really. Like just twist them and like just try until you find something nice. And then after that, we have an EQ just to take off the lows and a little bit of the high end, but from just the side signal, or this like hybrid reverb signal. So we got this going on. Because obviously you can tell, right? Like with all these like sub basses and all these like low mids, it's just gonna get too messy. So cut all that out just to add that like extra high end and get rid of the rest. We run that into a disperser. Oh, let me turn off the solo on this. Run that into a disperser. Just like stretches that sound out and almost makes it sound like a bit like watery, if that makes sense. So yeah, use these settings. I think what it does is just it spreads out the signal so that it plays the low end first, and then whatever's on the high end here comes after. I'm pretty sure that's what it does, but not too sure. But yeah, makes a big difference, right? So it does that. Then afterwards, we have a compressed room reverb preset from Ableton as well. Just creates more stereo, gives it a bit more space. Pretty big difference. EQ after to take out some of the muddiness that we created with all these effects. Bring the high end back up. So like we got a dip at like 200 hertz here, and then a boost at around like 2K. Saturator after, just to make sure that the signal that's coming out is like coming out at 0, just to have some more control. EQ again, take out the sub, because like I said, we have our own sub over here, so we have an EQ here just to take out the sub. This plugin, which Samplifier also shows in the video, but it just adds like, or you can add a little bit of extra boost on the sides or maybe on the mids. So in this case, I decided to just boost the sides 2 decibels. So with, it sounds like this. And then without. Not too noticeable, but I probably did this while I was finishing up the track, just because I thought that the sides needed a little bit more space or a little bit more volume. So in the final mix, it probably makes more sense. And then we ended off with a final EQ here. Like a little boost here at the around like 600 hertz, just to give it a bit more body, as well as a slight high-end boost. But looks like a very minimal EQ, but does quite a lot. It's just all like about making like small boosts like that. Which is what I do most of the time. Like if I decide to cut something on an EQ, usually it's pretty deep. Even though here it's only like what, like -3 decibels, which isn't that much. But when I boost, I decide, or I guess like in this case, I'm still boosting to like 3 decibels, but most of the times my boost is like 1 or 2 dB. But I guess for like this recent rec, this Maelstrom sound, I like went pretty overboard with it, right? Like 6 dB. But yeah. Usually I cut pretty deep, but then if I boost, I just only want to boost it like 1 or 2 decibels. And then we have an additional layer here. Just the Serum preset, I think. Let me see. Looks like an All Profit preset together with one of his multipass presets. So very simple sound, but when with the multipass on, comes kind of crazy. And again here as well, I just added the EQ to just select the high end of the sounds, because too messy, right? Can't really use that. So just use the highs, saturate them, put them in a gate just to make sure that like whatever like reverb or stuff is going on is being cut off. So everything below this line, whenever the signal ducks, it automatically cuts it out, which is a lot more easy than like dragging a utility on and, you know, cutting out all the reverb tills by yourself. So that's why I like to use a gate. More layers. A very high pitch layer. I like to add these with a frequency shifter down here. So pitching it up 500 hertz. Without it, it sounds like this. Very simple bass shot. I like to pitch them up. I just add the frequency shifter, drag the fine up all the way to 500 hertz, and then afterwards I added an OTT and a saturator. Just create that like extra bit of distortion, right? And then on the downbeat, I have a brass sample, which is unprocessed. But it just helps to like emphasize that downbeat, right, that I have here. So like with all the downbeats, every 4 bars, or I guess every 2 bars, it just adds a little bit more like extra sound. And then for the sub bass, we got this same sub bass that I use in all my tracks. So if you want to grab that as well, it's on the Patreon. Same sub bass. And if we look at the MIDI, we see some pitch bend going on. Let me see, pitch bend. Just to add a bit more movement to the sub, right? Because if without the pitch, it would sound pretty boring. It's just the same note over and over and over again. So I just add a little bit of pitch bend to add that variation. create some more swing, right? So that's what I have for the sub, and together they sound like this. But then I have a bunch of processing going on the bass group itself. So without all this processing, let me see. Let's just turn off this first group. Without this processing on the first group, it's gonna sound like this. So it seems like I'm adding a bit more stereo and a bit more distortion on like the high mids and the highs. And so for the EQ, I have a little boost here. I guess just to like have it give it a bit more body again. And then here I'm taking off the highs. And so if you remember from the main sound over here, I have pretty much like the opposite EQ. So I guess I could just lead one of the two, but yeah, that's kind of funny how that goes. So in this case, I'm adding some mids again, and then I'm cutting off some of the highs. But like I said, only like 1 dB, right? So very small changes, which is probably something that I did when I was finishing up the track, like when I got to mastering it. In this case, I'm bringing it down 5 decibels before I add it into like another compression group. And so didn't want to overcompress it. That's why I took it down 5 decibels just to have like a little bit more room to like bring it back up after. And so in this case, I have the Camel Crusher here with these settings that runs into an imager. Just adding, like, have these bands, and it just adds some more stereo information the higher up in the frequency spectrum we go. And then I ended off with this clip shifter, which is my favorite trick ever, is when you combine these basses that have no sub bass, and when you combine them with the sub bass into the clip shifter, it makes sure that your signal comes out at 0, right? Which makes mixing and mastering very easy, because automatically, because this is coming out at 0, you're not gonna have any like weird things going on with your sub, and it automatically creates like a very nice distortion, because it glues the sub and like the main basses together. It just creates this really nice like crunchy sound. And then by the time when you get to your mixing and mastering, this is already like a very controlled signal, and so you don't have to do like crazy changes. Like you're not gonna run into issues where your sub is just completely overpowering everything in the song. So definitely recommend like combining the basses and the sub and then running them into a clipper. Could be either like a G clip or K clip, like free clip, whatever is your favorite clipping plugin, but I highly recommend Clip Shifter. I believe it's free as well. So there is that. And then I have a EQ here, which I've only used for the fake out. And let's go over the fake out real quick while we're at it. Here is the fake out. Double check. So yeah, just a riser, but the main sounds of the fake out are part of the original, as well as a layer that I added just to add some more like grit, some more power, which follows the same rhythm and the same notes as the original. But then I have, oh, actually this EQ is not used for the fake out. This EQ is used for the fake out in the second part, I believe, over here. Yep. So over here, I turn this EQ on, like a telephone EQ. So you can tell, right, what that does. Typical fake out sound. You can do that with many things. I just like to use this phone preset from FabFilter. This second part is pretty much the same as the first part. I think I have a small variation on this recent bass. Oh, play so yeah, very similar. Same processing, but I just did some changes inside of Reason itself. So I double timed one of these mods just to have like a small variation going on there. So still a very similar sound, but just slightly different, just to have something new going on in the second part, as well as this sound. which is almost like a riser. So like this could have almost gone into the effects group, but it's just like an extra sustain to progress the song a little bit further. And for the rest, it stays pretty much the same, besides these hi-hats that I add in. Like almost like these trap hi-hats, right? Just to, again, add some variation to it. So that's pretty much all of it for the first drop. There's some effects going on here, but it's nothing crazy. And that's the nice thing when you're remixing a song. It's like they already have all the effects and stuff in them. And so usually when I'm like remixing or like making an edit, I don't have to add too many effects because the original already has them in. And you can save a lot of time on that and just, you know, continue with the main sounds. But yeah, that's pretty much all of it for the drop. Yeah, the intro is just the original track. Nothing going on besides this like impact that I use all the time. Just like that. Or I like to add that to all of my tracks. But that's pretty much it for the intro and the break. And if we take a look at the build up. And so if you take a look at the build up for this first part, I don't even have my own build up, I think. I think it's just all the original. Yeah, it's just the original. I only added a build up on the part between the two drops. So let's go over that instead. We have these drums. Very simple, like very typical, you know, your basic dubstep build up, which again, because we're remixing it, it doesn't need too much because we already have the original build up playing as well. Like the only thing I did here is just take out the lows so it doesn't get too muddy. So all the lows are coming from like my end and not from the original. So we have these drums, which is the same kick drum playing, except I turn it down 3 decibels. That's what I like to do most of the time because build-ups especially get pretty noisy because you have so many layers going on. And like that's one of the reasons why sometimes your build-up can end up a lot louder than the drop itself. So I like to turn down the kick 3 decibels and then go from there. So we have the kick, this Kashmir Stadium cut. Just create like a lot of room, a lot of noise, and then like a very simple ivory build-up loop. Nothing crazy going on there. The only thing that I do like to add is my own sub bass in a build-up. And so there's a rec you can also grab from the Patreon or from the project file itself, because I use this in all my tracks. I just like to have this build-up that's pitching up over time. Just like a riser, really. But yeah, I like to use that on all of my tracks just to like keep it cohesive, like keep it sounding similar. And then all there's left for this track really is the mastering. So up here, I guess I'll show you this. I have my kickstart, which is a sidechain. And so I've set this to the kick and snare group. And so whenever one of these samples play, oh, let me open them up. Whenever one of these samples play, I have it set up so that every time either this kick or this snare plays, everything ducks. And so everything, as you can see here, this is going to the sidechain. The effects are going to the sidechain. Yeah, this is where the sidechain happens. Nothing crazy going on, but I don't see kickstart 2 a lot, so figured some of you might be interested in like how that's set up. But that's my choice of sidechain really. And then for the mastering, let's see. I have a little bit of automation going on. In this case, I turn down the stereo width right before the drop hits, just to create a bit more contrast and to make sure that the drop hits the loudest, right? So if we listen to this like little fake out, it's not completely mono, but I took the width down to 50%, so it's like half mono. And so without, I think just it eases up too much energy. And so with little tricks like this, you can ensure that your drop is still going to be like the loudest part of the track. So I like to do that, take the width down. Sometimes I automate the gain down during the build-up just to make sure the drop is the loudest. But in this case, I only added the utility for the width. Running into my master chain, which is this dynamics, which slightly compresses the sound. Oh, let me see. So if we take a look at it. As you can tell, it's ducking down most of the transients, which just allows us to increase the sound again, like in the final stage of the master, just a little bit more. So this is mostly just a compressor. You can copy these settings if you like. They're up here. Running into the utility, which I have set to bass mono, and everything below 100 hertz in my tracks, I'm putting it to mono just to be sure. So if we listen to that. Everything you're hearing right now is mono. The rest is still playing like as usual. So after that, running into a FET filter, which I'm taking again like around this 240 hertz, like 240 up to like 260, 270 maybe. I like to take it down a bit, but I make a dynamic EQ. So this is only being affected when it's like being triggered like slightly too much, because this range gets very muddy. So I like to take it down with a dynamic EQ. So as you can see, like the EQ starts moving, right? So it's taking down a bit of the snare, but mostly I do it for the basses, just to like get rid of the muddiness a little bit more. And then after that, we have a match EQ. If you have a track that you really like the mix down of, highly recommend using match EQ, because you can record the original, and then after that you can record your own track, and this like gives you a good idea of the differences between the two mixes. So I think in this case I used the Samplifier and Marshmallow track, Gangster, or like Till I Bleed, or whatever it's called. Recorded that and then recorded my own, just to see if I could get like a similar mix to like what they have going on for that. But as you can tell, I still had too much like low mids, and so for my track, the match EQ automatically is taken down like this area, right? Like between 120 to like 800 hertz. It's still ducking it a little bit, because apparently I still had too much like low mids going on. So that's why I have that for. I don't always like use it like turn on. Sometimes I just like to use it as like an analyzing thing, just to like yeah, just to compare the mixes, really, to compare like what their frequency response is compared to mine. So in my case, I had a little bit too much of the low mid still, and then it's taken off like a small amount at the high end, but nothing crazy. And then at the end, I have a G clip. This catches everything and just like soft clips it, because I have it set to 45% softness. And so this just makes sure that everything that comes out of Ableton is coming out at 0 decibels. So you automatically know if you're gonna like extort it or export it, play it out, you're not gonna run into any like weird issues. Like what you hear is pretty much what it's gonna sound like, because you already have this clipper on. It's coming out at 0, and so after that, there's no like weird distortion or anything going on. So I always like to end it off with a G clip and then adjust the settings, really see how loud you can get it. Like don't want to get it too loud, obviously.